Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. For those who are new here, I typically make videos about productivity techniques, the tech that I use, or the best practices when it comes to mental health and physical health. But for this video, I'm going to change things up just a little bit by talking about something that I'm incredibly passionate about. Aside from being a YouTuber, podcaster, and entrepreneur, my day job consists mostly of me being a ghostwriter. I've ghostwritten more than 60 books, and 90% of them are non-fiction, self-help, motivational, or just general instructional material. However, I also read a lot. In fact, a few years back, I managed to read around 112 books in a single year. Lately, since I've been so busy, I've only been able to average around 60 to 75 books a year. Comment down below if you want me to do a video on tips on how to read more books. But anyway, out of all of the books that I've read, 90% of them are fiction books. In fact, I love fiction so much that I made a podcast that's purely dedicated to just talking about my favorite fiction. Contrary to popular belief, fiction books aren't just consumed for mere entertainment. It's just that the lessons that you can find in fiction are more of soft sells. There can be just as many lessons that you can find in fiction books as you would in self-help or instructional guides. The lessons in fiction aren't always going to be explicit, as they come in the form of metaphors, figures of speech, and subtext. Often, the lessons that are found in fiction books require a greater deal of effort on the part of the reader. Also, fiction books tend to be a lot more creative and inventive. I happen to be a creative individual, and so the creativity that's associated with creating something from scratch that's completely fictionalized greatly appeals to me. There's also something inherently valuable in creating a unique work of fiction. I can hop online and read a bunch of articles that would essentially give me the same kind of content as reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. But no other writer would ever be able to replicate the magic that comes with reading something like the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. Lastly, reading fiction just is a lot more fun. I'm a lot more engaged when I'm reading about the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo as opposed to reading about why everything is fucked. And with that out of the way, I wanted to give my 5 book recommendations to start off your reading list for 2022. Now, all of the books that I will be talking about today are fiction books, but they have lessons in them that will help you develop to become a better human being. I know that The Alchemist is such a cliche to bookworms out there when it comes to book recommendations. There's a reason that it's such a cliche because it's such an easy and accessible book, especially for a lot of novice readers who are getting into reading for the first time. The Alchemist is a story about an Andalusian shepherd boy who goes in search of his dream. Technically speaking, from a writer's perspective, there's nothing extraordinary about the story structure that The Alchemist adopts. The Alchemist follows Dan Harmon's story structure wherein the hero goes on some kind of journey that forces him to undergo a personal transformation. This is a formula of storytelling that has been applied to so many different kinds of movies, books, and other works of art. But even though there's nothing special about the story itself, there's something so endearing about the way that the story is told. My favorite part about The Alchemist is that Coelho infuses a bunch of different short stories and parables that are so thoughtfully written and make the reading experience so much more endearing. If you're just getting into reading fiction for the first time, especially if you're coming from a self-help background, I think that The Alchemist is a perfect bridge between the two disciplines. And the next book that I want to talk about is a classic, Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. Don Quixote, the Man of La Mancha, is honestly one of my favorite novels of all time. It's what many literary experts dub as the first modern novel. It's a story that inspired so many other great works of art. In particular, it inspired one of my favorite television shows of all time, The Newsroom. If you haven't watched that show, I highly recommend it. It's Aaron Sorkin at his best. This is the guy who was responsible for writing The West Wing, The Social Network, The Trial of the Chicago 7, and a bunch of other great works. But I digress. Don Quixote is a story about an eccentric man who lived in 17th century Spain. He was so obsessed with ideas of chivalry and knighthood and gentlemanliness, even though that wasn't really a thing back in 17th century Spain. He reads a lot of literature about chivalry and knights, and so he decides to go on this weird journey to transform himself into a knight as well. Of course, since it's so peculiar, he's made a laughingstock by the people around him, and it's essentially a story about a crazy man doing crazy things that no one else really cares about. And the biggest takeaway of this novel is that there is value in believing in something so immensely, even when other people are laughing at you for it. I didn't want this list to be composed of just classic fiction, and so I'm going to include this book, The Vanishing Half by Bennett. This is going to be the only modern title of this list, but if this video does well, I might come out with more videos talking about more modern titles as well. The Vanishing Half is a story about two African American twins who have incredibly light skin. In fact, their skin is so light that they can even pass off as Caucasians or white people. The two sisters go through some serious childhood trauma as a result of racial tensions, and so as they get older, one of them decides to abandon the life that she once knew to live a new life as a white woman. This novel was dubbed as one of the best novels of 2020 by the New York Times, Time Magazine, and The Guardian, to name a few. It's a story that touches heavily on acknowledging one's identity and owning up to one's path in life. It would be a shame to live a life purely on how other people expect you to live, because you would end up compromising a lot of your own happiness in the long run. To Kill a Mockingbird is an endearing classic novel that's beloved by so many literature buffs in history. If you don't have the patience to read, I don't really know what you're doing watching this video in the first place, but there is a movie version of this book, and I can say that it's just as good an experience as actually reading it. To Kill a Mockingbird is a great character study and a social commentary, especially when it comes to racial relations. It also features one of my all-time favorite dad characters in all of fiction, Atticus Finch. And the greatest lessons that this story teaches really revolve around the idea of taking the time and making greater efforts to get to know the people around us, to be more empathetic, to be more sensitive. Most of the time, we fear the things that we don't understand, and that's where a lot of the racial tension comes from, even in modern days. And this book just talks about how we would be much better off if we take the time to understand the people who are not like us. And the last book that I'm going to be talking about today is 1984 by George Orwell. I am a firm believer in the saying that politics is in everything, whether it be family life, office life, your relationship with your friends, or in political arenas between candidates and governments and all of that. And I also firmly believe that political decisions will greatly affect you and the way that you live your life, even if you don't necessarily study politics or don't even believe in it. It's a lot like the laws of gravity. You may not necessarily understand the science of how gravity works, but if you jump off the roof, the laws of gravity will apply to you all the same. And it's the same with politics. Just because you don't understand politics doesn't mean that it's not going to affect you. That's why it should be in your best interest to always understand how politics works. And I feel like 1984 does a very good job in telling a very harrowing and scary story about politics, albeit something that's very enlightening and eye-opening. It's incredibly impressive considering that a 60-year-old book remains to be as relevant as when it was first published. Even though you might not be a fan of political literature, I think that 1984 is one of the most important reads of the modern times. And yeah, that just about does it for this book recommendation video. I hope you guys liked it. Again, if you guys want me to put out more content like this, I have so many other recommendations. Of course, I also want to plug my podcast, Fiction Friends. We're on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts. I do a lot of book reviews there too. And yeah, don't forget to like this video, comment down below if you enjoyed it, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.